Hello everyone. I wanted to make this video as a voiceover so I can draw attention to something. Obviously this is Kratom news, and I wanted to cover it like this because number one, this is really important to me, and number two, I want you guys to be able to visualize this on the screen. So enough said, I'm going to start reading. So here we go. FDA releases Kratom death data, undermines its own claims about drugs' deadly harms. Why is that not a surprise? Ha ha ha. The cases include a suicide and a drug overdose victim who tested positive for 9 different substances. And again, I know that other people have covered this on their channel, but let's see how I do this differently, eh? Yeah, you already know. So, moving on, continue reading. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration is escalating its campaign against Kratom with the release of new information describing a series of deaths involving the popular herbal drug. Oh, so now it's a drug. Interesting. The FDA says that the incidents underscore the serious and sometimes deadly risks of kratom, but the list contains a number of events in which kratom played an uncertain role, including a case in which a teenager hanged himself and another in which a drug overdose victim says it tested positive for 9 different substances. And I'm going to pause it right there so I can take a little dose of my own kratom that's sitting right here, right by my side. Yes, yes, yes. Hello, hello, hello. And now my face is back up to the microphone. So I'm going to continue reading while I'm going to dose myself with my own kratom. And that's what works for me. So continue right now. As a whole, the data suggests the FDA is basing its warnings about kratom's fatal harms on a patchwork of loosely sourced anecdotal reports that says very little about how the drug is responsible for the fatalities, or even whether it is at all. Ha ha ha. I'm internally laughing as I'm reading that. In a press release Tuesday, FDA Commissioner Scott Gottlieb, however you pronounce that, sought to reinforce a November public health advisory in which he claims that there was clear data, quote, in the increasing harms associated with kratom. Quote, at the time, the FDA said it was aware of 36 deaths involving kratom, which it held up as evidence of the gravest of the drug's potential harms. The FDA has found 8 additional cases since then, Gottlieb said Tuesday, bringing the total number of kratom-associated deaths to 44. He also announced the agency has conducted a quotes, novel scientific analysis, quotes, of kratom that further supports the FDA's characterization of the substance as an opiate. The new data adds to our body of substantial scientific evidence supporting our concerns about the safety and abuse potential of kratom, said Gottlieb. As the scientific data and adverse events reports have clearly revealed, compounds in kratom make it so it isn't just a plant, it's an opiate. Kratom is an herb derived from the leaves of a Southeast Asian tree related to coffee. It's sold in the U.S. as an unregulated herbal supplement and commonly taken in powder forms, in capsules or tea. In my case, capsules. Kratom has opiate-like effects and is often used as a mood enhancer or for its stimulant or sedative qualities. I cover that in my channel. which can vary depending on the dose and strain. Supporters regulatory tout it as a natural treatment for conditions like chronic pain, anxiety, and depression. Others claim it is a safe alternative to traditional opiates, both legal and illegal, which has also contributed to kratom's increasing popularity as a step-down treatment off of painkillers or heroin. Yep. But due to the lack of regulations around herbal supplements, kratom is largely free from consumer standards or on quality or dosing. That's half truth. Leading to fears about the possible adulteration of products and problems related to improper self-medication or misuse by youth, the FDA has maintained that kratom is dangerous and has pointed to the lack of an approved medical use as justification to impound numerous shipments of kratom products in the U.S. Isn't that a pretty picture? On Tuesday, Gallup reiterated concerns about kratom's potential for abuse, addiction, and serious health consequences, including death. As proof of the drug's deadly harms, the FDA released reports of 36 deaths involving the use of kratom, culled from academic research, medical examiner reports, and adverse event reports. Gallup also said the FDA plans to release the 8 newly received reports. Almost all of the FDA's cases involved subjects who were found to be on multiple substances at the time of their death. Why is that not a surprise? At least to me, at the very least. Yeah. With the vast majority including either illicit or prescription drugs that carry well-known fatal risks. One incident describes a teenager who had hanged himself after struggling with depression and prescription drug abuse. He tested positive for a variety of drugs, including kratom, as well as alcohol and a handful of prescription drugs. Enough said. I had to process that in my head because honestly I didn't read this whole article up until now. I skimmed through it. So let me continue from there. Another case involves a man who has fallen out of a window, broken his arm, and refused treatment before dying. He was ultimately found to have 9 different substances in his bloodstream, among them mitragynine. Hopefully I pronounced that right. The primary psychoactive substance in kratom. Oh, yeah. FDA's list of kratom-related deaths also includes a 43-year-old man determined to have died from complications due to deep vein thrombosis. I don't know what that means. He had a long list of medical problems, including chronic back pain and shoulder pain, and a history of alcohol and prescription drug abuse. At the time of his death, he'd recently been prescribed 5 different medications. His toxicity test came back positive for opiate benzophenes. I didn't even try to pronounce that right. Best known as Xanax, antidepressants, and medications apparently used to treat his Tourette's syndrome. He also tested positive for kratom. One case the FDA listed as a kratom-related death, which has been completely redacted in the document, appears elsewhere in an agency database as a death by homicide due to a gunshot wound to the chest. 9 of the FDA's 36 documented deaths were related to a string of fatal overdoses in Sweden in 2010, which involved a controversial kratom-based product that has been adulterated with a dangerous synthetic opiate. and additional 8 cases that FDA previously released to HuffPost consisted largely of voluntary reports, including accounts from family members who simply suspected their loved ones have died from kratom use. Just one of the FDA's cases appeared to involve the presence of kratom alone. Through the report includes no information on the deaths apart from the subject's age and ethnicity. The report showed the individual tested positive for high levels of meganin, the main ingredient in kratom, but as in the rest of the case says nothing about how the substance was determined to have contributed to his death. The FDA denied HuffPost's request for additional information on the case. In his Tuesday statement, Gulb said the agency is investigating another kratom-related death involving an individual who, quote, had not known his historical. That's what I thought it was. That's what I thought the word was. I don't know why I had trouble saying that. Historical or toxicologic evidence of opioid use, except for kratom. Taken together, the FDA case reports provided no clear picture of the, quote, deadly risks, unquote, the agency claims kratom possesses. There is also a certain irony in the fact that so many of the deaths the FDA associates with kratom also appear to have involved prescription drugs, which it argues much safer must be safer than kratom. In fairness to the FDA, it has acknowledged the limitations of the reporting system used to compile these deaths. On its website, the FDA says the inclusions of a case doesn't imply a, quote, casual relationship, unquote, between a product and an event. It also notes that, quote, reports do not always contain enough data to properly evaluate an event, unquote. Well, on a side note, in my own head, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't that the FDA blatantly coming out and contradicting itself? In my opinion, I think so. Yeah. Gulb appears to be at least somewhat aware of these constraints. Many of the cases received could not be fully assessed because of limited information provided, quote unquote. He said in the statement, adding that, quote unquote, a few cases, quote, raise concerns that kratom is being used and combined with other drugs, quote. Yeah, probably obviously not a good idea. Cases of mixing kratom, other opiates, and other types of medications is extremely troubling because of the activity of kratom as an opiate receptor indicates there may be similar risks of combining kratom with certain drugs, just as there are with FDA-approved opiates, Gottlieb said. Clear my throat. Gottlieb specifically referenced prior FDA warnings about kratom side effects, including, quote, seizures and respiratory depression. Let me pause there, and based on the amount of kratom that I've had experience taking, in my personal opinion, and again, I do not have any sort of medical degree, and I'm not stating this as scientific fact whatsoever, but in my opinion, it may actually help seizures, I'm pretty sure. And respiratory depression, let's just say, in my opinion, based on the high doses that I've had experiences on, that's nothing to worry about. So, let me continue. But these potentially deadly symptoms don't appear in any sort of discernible pattern in the case the FDA cites, and they're not well documented elsewhere. While scientific studies on the effects of migrainum, migraine, the main ingredient kratom, on humans are still lacking, largely because it's difficult to get funding for research on a plant that can't be patented. Oh, there you go, right there. Most of the emerging science on kratom has found it to be largely benign, especially when taken in low or moderate doses. Well, here I am coaching you guys through high doses for whatever slightly more serious ails that you might be dealing with. So, that's where my channel comes into play. Hello and welcome if you're new, by the way. Andrew Krugel, a Columbian University chemist, has authored a number of studies on the pharmacology of kratom. On Tuesday, he questioned Goldup's conclusion that the substance is simply a quote-unquote opiate, a conclusion the commissioner based off the FDA's use of computation modeling and the chemical structure of kratom's compounds. They don't have to do this to claim that kratom is an opiate because it is quote unquote, said Kruger, quote, but the question is whether it is an atypical opiate, which is my preferred terminology. Does it have a better side effect profile than the classical opiate drugs like morphine that we use every day? That's the key question here. Yes, it is. Krugel added that the FDA's analysis was a quote unquote an order of magnitude less rigorous than quote many of the studies that had already been conducted on kratom. He said the FDA's claim was akin to quote say that all opiate agents have the same effect, which is not true based on what we've learned about these compounds. Quote, opiate agonists provide pain relief by binding to opiate receptors. The FDA's presentation on kratom-related deaths appears to follow a broader practice in which officials seem to be determining that any fatal incident involving kratom must therefore be related to the drug. But this haphazard characterization of kratom's supposed deadly risks does nothing to expand the understanding of how the drug supposedly kills people, if it does at all. And in fact, lumping these cases together despite their obvious dissimilarities may end up producing a misleading narrative about kratom's actual effects, said Leo Betesky, an associate professor of law and health science at Northeast University. Quote, you have to who identify and isolate the effects of the drug and the only real way to do that is through randomized controlled trials or really robust observational evidence, he said. We don't have that, quote. FDA's data could have severe implications for the future of kratom. The latest press release comes as the agency appears to be leading a push to ban the substance under federal law. Again, good luck with that. Following pushback in the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration's postponed a move to place kratom in Schedule 1 alongside drugs like heroin and LSD, but the FDA recently completed an analysis that may help determine how the DEA proceeds. A spokesperson for the DEA said Tuesday that it could take months or even years for the agency to reach a final decision on scheduling. Just a little mental side note, No, they can't do anything to this thing until they have a concrete proven reason, and they probably know that, and they probably know that more and more people are catching on to how these people operate with their deceitful practices. So, moving on, continue reading. Based on the FDA's recent public actions, however, it appears to favor outright prohibition, a move that would cut off millions of Americans, many of whom have struggled with opioids or other prescription drugs from their preferred method of treatment. Some drug policy experts and a handful of congressional lawmakers have said the damage caused by forcing people away from kratom and possibly back into other prescription or illicit drugs would far outweigh the current harms. Furthermore, if kratom were to be banned, many individuals would simply continue buying and using it illegally. If feds are worried about controlling kratom now, driving it into the black market would only make that harder. Yeah. Betesky admitted there was still a lot of quote unnecessary quote uncertainty surrounding kratom, and said it warrants further research to better understand its full range of effects and possible harms. But considering there are an estimated 3 to 5 million kratom users around the U.S., according to industry figures, he added that the relatively low number of supposed kratom-related deaths, even in questionable cases like this, could actually suggest that kratom is not very harmful. The only time we've found kratom to be involved in adverse events are times when, even in the absence of kratom, you still have really deleterious effects. Deleterious effects. Yep, he said. I worry that by taking these kratom involved adverse events and painting them as kratom caused adverse events, we're going to run into a misclassification of what the problem is. And then, as a result, we're going to deploy policy solutions that are based on that faulty classification. Exactly. And I think that that's the end of the article. Yep. And it's interesting how the comment section is, from what I can see, nowhere to be found. So that's it. And welcome to my one-liner again. Much love. I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace, love, and unity. We are going to pull this off. Hello. Real talk.